today we are here with Ricardo Menendez from the Green Party and Numbersman Clint Smith. Welcome to the program.
Kia
Thanks for
ora.
having
Thank you
us.
for having us.
So, Ricardo, let's start with the elephant in the room. How are you feeling about the situation with your former colleague, Darlene Tunham?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been very well canvassed that as a party, we don't think the way that Darlene acted was in line with our values and principles. And that we don't think she's fit to be an MP, both because she wasn't honest and upfront with the party about her involvement with her former business and in relationship to allegations, really serious allegations of migrant exploitation. So we're now just carrying a process with the party to basically explore whether our membership will back expelling her from parliament altogether under the legislation we have available to us.
She made claims that she will not leave uh, um, unless forced to leave. So, if your party does not choose to activate the walk and jump legislation on the 1st of September, that meeting, what are the next steps for the party?
Yeah, look, we're taking it one step at a time, and I kind of don't want to explore hypotheticals because at the end of the day, part of what we're doing is going above and beyond what the legislation says we have to do. Like, we could try to use it right now if we wanted to, but we believe that actually our membership needs to give us a mandate. And what Darlene says and does is just entirely up to her. We've made it really clear what we think should happen, which is that she should resign for parliament. They should resign for parliament, out of mine.
Okay. So, we've also got you here to talk about the recent benefit sanctions announced by this government. What was your initial reaction to the announcement a few weeks ago?
Yeah, look, I mean, the National Party has absolutely no regard to people living in poverty and receiving income support. And I think they're doing what they've done every time they've been in government, which is to throw beneficiaries off a cliff as soon as they get in. I think it's what we've got to make it clear here is that sanctions, which is what they're doubling down on, don't help people into employment. It actually only pushes people further into hardship. And what it will result in is more families struggling to pay their bills, getting into debt, going to food banks just to make ends meet. And so to me, it's really concerning because it'll result in more people struggling just so that they can claim that they've got people off the benefit. I've worked with beneficiaries through most of my professional life and organized alongside many people on income support. And I've never seen anyone sanction who's told me, well, thanks to having my income cut and being starved out, I now feel really motivated to find a job. Like, that's just not how it works in practice.
And for you, Clint?
Yeah, I mean, like Ricardo says, we know these sanctions don't work. If the goal was really to reduce the number of people on job seeker work ready, then you would focus on creating jobs. The number of people on what we can call the dole rises when unemployment rises, and right now we have government policy that's designed to increase unemployment, and Reserve Bank policy doing that too, and we're turning around and blaming the people who are victims of those policies, and then implying that they're not trying to find work. There's a real consistent. This goes across the whole breadth of the government's policy, that there's a real disrespect to the targets or the victims of these policies. There's never any consultation. There's never any sort of intellectual honesty. We're meant to sort of buy these hackneyed claims that we know aren't true, and that everyone by now knows that sanctions don't work and these things, but they're still putting out these hackneyed lines. And also, there's no depth to it. There's no sitting down and saying, okay, what's the actual problem here? How are we actually going to solve it? It's not about solving the problem at the end of the day. It's meme level politics, and it's just about going back to the old hackneyed lines that, look, they do scratch an itch for some voters. They, they probably play well to the National Party base, but they don't actually make New Zealand a better place.
And one more
Right.
question one more question for you before I hand over to Paul. So we asked our guests this last week, what was your reaction when you saw them smiling as they went into the room to make this beneficiary announcement and the subsequent disability announcement, if you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, so I mean, on moving, basically passing disability support services to MSD, I think it's just that lack of respect towards disabled people, right? Of like the feedback from disabled people has been really clear that we need an agency that it's a standalone agency led by and for disabled people. And MSD doesn't have the best track record of providing good services for disabled people. And we have to also make it really clear that at the end of the day, this is about cutting the initiatives that would have allowed disabled people to fully participate in their communities. And I think that's part of why we're really, really concerned. The other component, I guess, in relationship to the welfare stuff and connecting it to this is that we basically got a lot of disabled people who are still on the job seeker benefit. And because we've medicalized our income support system so much, we've got a lot of people who actually haven't been able to get to the supported living payment that doesn't have those obligations. And I'm really concerned that we're medicalizing the system so much that you've got people who are waiting months to get a diagnosis to prove to someone their condition. And then they will have to prove in 2 years' time that they're still got potentially this lifelong health condition or disability. And it's just really dehumanizing. And I think to me, this government has shown no respect towards disabled people. And we've got to remember that all of us actually can become disabled at any point in our life. And that this should be an issue that able-bodied people should also care about because it affects us all. So yeah, it's just that lack of respect towards disabled people that is really concerning. And yeah, I look forward to organizing alongside other disabled people to push back on this and to ensure that Whaikaha can kind of return in a way that works for the communities that it's supposed to serve.
Yeah, and I get, because I'm being disabled myself, I'm lucky enough to be able to get reviewed every 5 years. But and I know people don't have that luxury for the most part, but people like us should not have to do this all the time or every
That's right.
few. So yeah, you could.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as you know, I work with some disability groups, and when we knew this announcement was coming, we shared a letter that Disability Support Network had written to the minister while this review was ongoing, pleading basically to say, look, before you lock in these recommendations, at least talk to us. And it was revealed in the so-called reviews report that they didn't talk to any stakeholders before writing that report. They were given 6 weeks, and who knows how much they were paid to produce a 60-page report, and they just interviewed their typewriters, and they produced just a fig leaf for what they decided they were going to do anyway. There was no real justification in any of it for the decisions that they took. In fact, I don't even think that the moving of funding decisions away from Whaikaha was even recommended in the report. But the insidious thing for me is the freeze in funding and the freeze in the rollout of Enabling Good Lives. I mean, you kind of have to do the, are we the baddies thing when you're stopping a program called Enabling Good Lives and say, is this really who we want to be? But, this funding freeze, the providers, the carers, they're not sitting on, they're already strapped to the bone. Now they're facing inflation, minimum wage goes up, they have to pay their workers more, they want to pay their workers more, but they're not going to get any more funding from the government. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to reduce their services. They're going to have to stop taking people on. And this is only the first round. We know there's a second round of this coming, where there's going to be actual cuts to accessibility and the breadth of assistance people can get. And we're told there'll be consultation, but I mean, how genuine that consultation will be, we'll have to wait and see.
I found it hilarious that she claimed the other day in the House that she had consulted with people. When answering one of your questions, in fact, Ricardo.
Well, that's, I mean, yeah, like the questions we've made on welfare just shows that I think to me, it's that like accepting that the minister doesn't care. Like, I think there's this whole theater of kind of pretending that they care. But like every time I've asked Louise Upson a question, like it just to me confirms that she doesn't really care. You know, we've tried to ask about what evidence she used to make these decisions. She said she doesn't really care. She would rather make fun, like, you know, or make light of the issue by taking cheap jabs at other politicians on it. And interestingly enough, one of the answers that I thought was really telling is that she admitted she didn't have any research, but what she's kind of holding on to, at least on the sanction side of things, for example, is she's saying, well, during the period the borders were closed at that kind of initial stage of the pandemic, sanctions basically stopped. And she's kind of correlating this idea that sanctions stopped and job seeker benefits jumped up. But she's completely ignoring the fact that, like, yeah, a lot of people lost their jobs because we had a pandemic. But one of the things I always say, actually, is that we actually ended up having record low levels of unemployment quite shortly after. And there were basically still almost no sanctions being applied. So to me, interestingly enough, this whole period of the borders being closed and almost no sanctions being applied shows that the world didn't turn upside down because there were no sanctions. We actually were able to get to record low levels of unemployment when there were barely any sanctions applied. And so it kind of shows we can actually have, like, go from really high unemployment to really low unemployment without the use of sanctions being the thing that gets us there. And I think that's to me was a really powerful thing. Obviously, we should be avoiding conflating correlation with causation, like those of us who like understand that it's just not good, not good practice to do. But yeah, I just think that the minister doesn't really care, like, and we just need to kind of come to terms with that and then fight back, well knowing that this is not about appealing to a government's common sense or rationality. This is about having to organize with communities on the ground to build power to make this a one-term government, because if the minister doesn't care, there's no amount of presenting reports and research and data to the minister to change her mind. She's kind of already admitted that she doesn't care about the research. She doesn't care about the evidence. She doesn't care, as you said, Blake, about consulting with disabled people on these issues. They're just determined to push ahead with these changes because that's kind of what their view of the world is, that we got to punish beneficiaries and we got to cut disability support services to get for the sake of the altar of the budget surplus, which it's at the expense of our community. So I guess that's just kind of the long-winded answer to your question, and just that kind of radical acceptance that they just don't care.
Sorry, Paul, I've taken up most of the time yapping about this.
That's all good. I've got some questions here actually that people have submitted on YouTube over the last couple of days, and that answer actually ties in really nicely to one of the questions that's popped up for you, Ricardo. If after the next election you're in a position to be able to negotiate for a coalition to take over government, how do the Greens advocate for beneficiaries within that negotiation period?
Yeah, well, look, we've been the only party consistently saying there should be no sanctions in the welfare system. And we had a very comprehensive plan last election to end poverty for all families. So for me, it's about making sure that it becomes a top priority to get a genuine welfare overhaul on the agenda to make sure that we get rid of all sanctions, that we lift benefits at least above the poverty line, and that we stop this horrible rule around if you get into a relationship, you could lose your benefit. Those are some of the bare minimums that I want to make sure we fight for in the next government. I think, to me, like, the lesson from previous kind of agreements with Labour is that we should not settle for things like, let's explore and commission a report on these things. Like, the research is there. People know what we need. Like, we just need to actually force the government to get on with the mahi of ending poverty. Because it's a choice. Like, continuing to keep benefits below the poverty line is absolutely a choice. So we just need to make sure we have an agreement that reflects that.
Clint, as somebody who sort of worked in both camps here with the Greens and Labour, how do you feel about those kind of hypothetical negotiations? Is there common ground there for people to work together on that you think is really important the public knows about, or best to just basically present what you have at the election and let the public decide?
Yeah, I think the relationship between the Greens and Labour has really matured over the years, and that's really good. You know, when I was a staffer back 10 years ago, and I went over to the Greens and then back, particularly on the Labour side, there was a lot of sort of bitterness towards the Greens that I don't think you see now. Now that they've been in government together, they've worked together. You know, Labour should accept that the Greens are always going to be pushing the boundaries more, and that's a good thing. You know, the Greens should be presenting that progressive future, and Labour's job is to be progressive, but also to win the centre. And you know, that means they won't always agree on everything, and degrees of difference will be there. But I think that that relationship now comes, I hope at least, from a place of more mutual respect than it would have 10 years ago, because they've seen that they can work together. This is my hope.
If I may just briefly add that I think one of the lessons for me from the past term is, you know, this idea of the center. It's like, I think politicians can get really caught up in wanting to define the center based on our own experiences. And, you know, one of the mistakes I think Labour did is actually they did not read the center. You know, if you look at the polling, like things like a wealth tax was incredibly popular. Like a lot of these policies like that, maybe Labour thought that would have scared the so-called centre were actually very, very popular. And so, and obviously popular policies doesn't mean people vote for you. Like, you know, there's, you know, a lot of people supported taking GST of fruits and veggies, and that then turned into like votes. But I guess like when it comes to policy positions, I do think like political parties need to not kind of just like on a silo define the center, and actually the center can be moved. And we've seen how the center can move left or right, depending on what political parties are willing to define as mainstream as well. So I think that's, the challenge I would throw to, say, for example, the Labour Party, is that like they also have a role in defining what the center can look like. So does frontline organizations and campaigners, but I think it's completely movable.
Oh, it's absolutely, I'd agree with that. And I think that, you know, you look at how Jacinda won on essentially Andrew Little's policy platform, that shows that winning isn't just about policy. And so you can run a more left-wing policy platform, but it's the ability to bring those voters with you. And yeah, I think there's also a valid thing, you know, what is the centre? We're actually talking about voters who are willing to change their minds. Sorry, I'm just surrounded by cats all of a sudden. They're just jumping all over me. So yeah, it's a really complex thing, and I think you're absolutely right that you know, a compelling leader with a compelling vision can run on progressive policies and win the middle.
That actually brings me really nicely to the next question that I've got submitted here. And I'm going to read this one word for word. So, how has National, New Zealand First and ACT been able to message so successfully when their policies are arguably unresearched, ill-advised and damaging to the vast majority of the population? Also, how has the left failed to message against it?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think this government, I think there are lessons for the left and what the government is doing. So I think, to me, like, one of the things that this government is doing is they're using power for terrible things, you know, to do horrible things, but they're actually wielding power. And I think like that ability to wield power to get your agenda through is actually quite important. But I would kind of question like this idea that like they have been, I guess, successful, because actually as a government, they remain relatively unpopular, and like Luxon remains a relatively unpopular leader despite kind of like pushing ahead with all this agenda. But this is the thing, right? Like these changes that they're making will also have long-term repercussions that will benefit the right. In the same way, some of the kind of like radical left-wing things will have benefits for creating the space for a transformation of how people view things, how if we lift people out of poverty, they're way more likely to be able to engage in democracy, and actually national benefits from disenfranchising a whole group of people, to keep people distracted, to keep people struggling to make ends meet, because that actually at the end of the day creates a whole block of voters who are disconnected, who are struggling to survive, and who the government will want to keep distracted, both on things like culture wars, but also just materially struggling to survive. And I think, so there are lessons there, but I also wouldn't, I guess, accept this notion that they've been like successful in making those reforms popular. I think the left has more work to do, no doubt about that. We've got to do more grant campaign. We've got to get into our communities. Chloe made that really clear in her speech at the AGM, that like there's hard work ahead for us. But it's kind of like a mix of both. Like there's work for us to do, and also like I kind of think the right's just kind of like wielding the power they've got, like effectively, for better or worse.
I'll let you respond, Clint, and then I got one last question. If you've got any.
Yeah, look, I'd say you look at the polls, and this isn't a hugely popular government. It isn't in the position that, say, the first term key government was at this point. It's vulnerable. Luxon is not a popular prime minister by historical standards. What's needed is a vision and a credible alternative. And we this is a government that I think could be out on one term if there's it has to be a Labour-led alternative that excites people. And right now, Labour's not in that space, and they need to be polling up into the 30s, drawing even with National, and then there'll be a credible alternative government from the left. But I think the change there will have to come from Labour. I think the Greens are doing an excellent job. Labour needs to reconstitute itself, lift its game, set a strategy, set a vision, and get back in the game.
This final question is a two-parter, one part for both of you and one part for you, Ricardo. First of all, to the both of you, how long do you think it'll be before we see a Green government, if we see one in our lifetime, led government? And for you, Ricardo, with the greatest of respect, I know your policy is limited or no sanctions. So how do we combat that by, doing the people that are taking advantage of the system? How do we sanction them or bring them up for not giving good behaviour if we're not having sanctions in your plan?
I'll touch on your second part of the question first, which I think is that, like, well, look, like, no one is saying that everybody will, like, that everybody will become this, like, angel if we get rid of sanctions. That's not the point of getting rid of sanctions. The point of getting rid of sanctions is that pushing people further into poverty doesn't actually address any of those kind of bad behaviors that you talk about, right? Actually, in order to address bad, so-called bad behaviors, we actually need to have people in a place where they're not having that toxic stress of having to survive on a weekly basis, to worry about paying their rent, to worry about paying their bills. Like, you can then think about what other interventions you have to do to address whatever, problematic behavior someone may be having that may be impacting themselves, their fellow community members, etc. And I think, to me, that's the kind of chicken and egg situation we've got, where the government currently, and Labour and national governments have kind of used sanctions as like one of these things to address behavior, but the research doesn't back that. And my own frontline experience doesn't back that either. So, we got to resource all the community initiatives that work directly with people who may be having problematic behaviors, to support them, in whatever intervention that looks like, whether it's like counseling, addiction support services, or whatever it may be. But like, keeping people in poverty and struggling to survive will never achieve that. Now, to your first question, to be honest, like, I don't know. And it's up to us to work to make sure we get a green government. Like, it's up to us to actually get on the ground and fight for that. And so, I hope in the near future, but actually it will take us growing our movement, going to communities that maybe we haven't actually gone before, being able to meet people at where they're at, and broaden our base by also articulating solutions to a range of issues, right? I know that we're trusted on climate issues. We got to build our trust on issues around inequality. We got to build our trust on issues around the economy as well. And that's hard work we've got to do. And I'm really excited that Chloe is able to articulate that need to kind of broaden our base without necessarily compromising on our values. And I think people are also hungry, as Clint said, for like an alternative vision that can be inspiring, but that also will require more than just, I guess, articulating the media, but us actually getting down on the ground, talking to people on the ground in the communities, and not leaving that work just a few months ahead of the election, but actually starting as soon as possible.
And for you, Clint?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say never on a green-led government, but over the last sort of 30 years, both National and Labour have had times when they've seen that it seemed that they might fall to third-party status, and they've managed to resist that each time. That they have a huge institutional base and resources that outstrip the smaller parties, and often when they've been in trouble, it's been a matter of them changing leader and going back to the drawing board, and they've been able to revive their fortunes. So the two parties are very strong, and but you never say never, right? Like, and like Ricardo says, it's a matter of the Greens sticking to their values, but being able to bring more people along with those values, because you wouldn't want to be in a situation where you have to essentially become the Labour Party to beat the Labour Party, because what the Greens bring to the left is that they are the vanguard party on the left, and you wouldn't want to lose that. So balance there. Do
you want to close, Paul?
Sure. I do love that title, Vanguard Party. That's a brilliant one. I want to thank you guys both for being here and taking time out of your busy day to sit down with us. It's very much appreciated.